Hey, it's Alex Roman, Executive Editor for Metro Magazine, and welcome back to METROspectives. My guests today are WSP USA's Advisory and Planning Business Lead, Jannet Walker-Ford, and David Scorey, CEO of Keolis North America. Today, they join me to discuss Walker-Ford's new position as chair of Keolis's board, workforce development, the new face in mobility, and much more. It's a great conversation. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining me today. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, doing great. Thank you, Alex. Wonderful to see you.
Doing really well, Alex. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. I really appreciate taking the time, and we're here to kind of discuss your new position there at Keolis on the board there. Can you talk a little bit about how excited you are to join the team, and David, how excited you are that Jannet is joining the team as well?
Sure. And Alex, as David just said, thank you for this conversation today. We're really excited to sit down with you, albeit virtual, to have this discussion. I am so thrilled to be appointed the Keolis board chair and to work with David as our CEO and his phenomenal executive leadership team. It is an exciting, more than exciting time in our industry, as you know. And so stepping into this role at this time, representing Keolis is such a privilege and an honor to serve. And I'm looking very much forward to working with David and his team as we move forward. But David, I certainly will hand it to you.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, and I echo Janet's sentiments about how excited we are and how thrilled we are that Janet has agreed to join us as board chair. It is definitely an exciting time for the industry, and I know we're going to talk quite a bit about some of the, what we're seeing in the industry at the moment and reflections on that. But for us at Keolis, meeting the contemporary challenges that the industry has, continuing to evolve as an organization, improve the way that we work. We're really looking, to Jannet and Janet's leadership and her experience across the industry, which is renowned, to really help guide our thinking and to guide our strategies going forward. And so delighted that she's joined us. And she is going to be an amazing addition to the work that we're doing here in North America.
Yeah, and let's pick up there. I think I wanted to talk about the evolution of public transit over the last few years. I think in the past, or in recent past, we referred to it as post-COVID, but it's really a continuation of what had been started pre-COVID. So can you talk a little bit about that, technology adoption and kind of how things are going right now?
Absolutely. Shall I start, Janet, if that's
Sure,
okay?
please. Sure.
Yeah, you can't talk about the current context without mentioning COVID. Hopefully there'll be a time when we don't have to talk about COVID so much. But you're right, COVID, I often think of COVID as one of the greatest disruptors for this industry that we will have ever experienced, certainly, in a generation, if not longer. And we know what happened during COVID, so I'm not going to talk, ad nauseum about that. But the post-COVID era, we've seen significant changes in ridership needs, expectations, riding patterns, and that's required us to evolve the services that we're offering, the times and types of services. The commuter patterns of yesteryear aren't here any longer. And so what we've seen on some of our networks, for example, and the commuter rail network here in Boston is a great example where we've changed the service offering quite significantly, is that we have now almost the same number of people riding as pre-COVID, but in a very different pattern. Weekend ridership is up precipitously. In fact, it's somewhere around 140% of pre-COVID ridership at weekends. Weekday ridership is similar to the pre-COVID era, but spread throughout the day, no kind of traditional peak or a minimal traditional peak in the morning and evening, but strong ridership throughout the day. So that's certainly something that as an industry we're coming to terms with, and we need to continue to work at to evolve the service so that we are meeting the contemporary needs of passengers and not trying to replicate what was there previously. Technologically, of course, we've seen huge advancements with energy transition and particularly, battery electric buses, hydrogen now coming through quite strongly. We're seeing that with changes in mobility as a service, trying to find ever more user-friendly ways to make the journeys as seamless as possible, using technology to advance that, to enable journey planning much more easily, purchase of tickets, integrated ticketing. These are some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry. And it's all geared up really to make the service as attractive and easy to use as possible for people in the needs that they have today. And I think it's much more geared towards, as well as work and the kind of the appointments that we all need to make and keep, to leisure, to entertainment, to special events, supporting those sorts of things as part of the everyday fabric of life. That's my reflection on what's going on in the industry right now. Jannet, I'm sure you've got some things that you'd want to add as well.
Oh, it's a hard act to follow, David, because I think you very well summarize what's happening in the industry. So if I just kind of maybe underscore a couple of the things that you mentioned, and I want to go right to that travel pattern change, David, and some of the, some of the outcomes that we've seen. Not only, you mentioned that we're seeing a shift in ridership pattern, but we're also seeing a different type of rider that's showing up, which is really, really, I think, exciting. We all smile and laugh about the Swifties and how they took over LA by storm and other cities around the country and around the world with their ridership that they did all on their own, right? Just this whole group or culture of assembling riders to use public transit. And I like to say, not only are they are they riding the system maybe for more leisure and weekend travel? But I really like the idea of it being, I don't know, like David, we talked about it being sexy, if I can say that word again, in terms of the way that they are personifying their travel experience on public transit. So that kind of traveler that's coming back in a different way and different expectations around transit is really a good and exciting trend for our country and really across the world. And I think that agencies are leveraging that and just better understanding what those needs are and desires are. We just came back from an American Public Transportation Association study mission that was to Europe, looking at Paris and London. Paris as they're getting ready for the Olympics, and we'll talk a little bit later about us getting ready from an LA perspective. They're seeing the same travel patterns that David described in terms of, more than surpassing pre-COVID numbers on the weekends in terms of that leisure travel. But as well as what we're seeing is a different pattern during the week where you have folks that have that work from home or hybrid working environment, David, that we talk about. And so it's not that Monday through Friday consistent, begin of rush hour, end of rush hour kind of travel pattern, but we're seeing something a little different, particularly, David, for commuter rail riders that tend to have a bit more flexibility. Now, on the bus side, we saw that uptick much faster, going up in terms of ridership numbers returning to normal, which are just about there for most, depending on the size of the agency. But commuter rail, David, from what I can recall, lagged a bit in the beginning, that we saw those numbers just slowly upticking, but we're now in June of 2024, finally seeing those numbers come up a bit, but they're going to be different than we saw before because of the flexibility that you might see more so with commuter riders, maybe 3 times a week going into the office versus, that 5 days a week. So that's pretty interesting. And then on the last piece, I wanted to kind of add to David's comment on mobility as a service from a technology perspective. I'm personally, being a recovering CIO, Chief Information Officer, really excited to see mobility as a service, or however you want to categorize that concept. I don't care at the end of the day, as long as you can get what we're talking about within a platform, one place, to have an integrated ticketing view, journey planning view, and awareness real time of what, it may be barriers, whether it's congestion or changes in patterns may affect your journey, that really give the user all in the palm of their hand that mighty cell phone, regardless of what type you have and what type of your preferred apps are. If you can get all that information in your hand, that's really important to users. And we're really seeing post-COVID, that technology be leaned on more than ever. And you can go regardless of what city you're in. I call it the travelocity of travel planning. You can decide, okay, I don't have to decide which app to go to, whether it's a TNC with an Uber or Lyft or your agency. You can just kind of go and look and say whether I'm walking, I'm driving, we want them on public transit or taking public transit. What are the options for getting me there? How long will it take me? And options for getting me there based on congestion, roadways, that kind of thing. How long will it take me and how much will it cost? And so depending on what I'm a student, I'm elderly, or I'm, or whatever, I care more about how fast I can get there and money's not a problem. You have choices. And I think that technology has finally matured so that so that the riding public can have more information, make those choices. And our hope is at the end of the day, they're going to pick public transit because we've simplified the experience and the understanding of how to take on that journey.
And I'm curious, with Keolis's experience around the world, I mean, are we seeing similar patterns in Europe and other countries where, public transit was kind of more ingrained at the time? How does what's going on in North America, compared to what's going on in other countries?
Yeah, there are parallels. And again, Jannet, just mentioned she's just returned from London and Paris, where, looked at some of the evolutions there. I think ridership recovery has tended to be a little stronger in some parts of the world. So we operate in Paris, of course, where, from a metro system perspective, we're pretty much back to pre-COVID levels. We operate in China, where we're above COVID levels, actually pre-COVID levels, and in Dubai, where we operate a driverless metro there. Where again capacity is a challenge, which is the problem we used to have on some of our transit systems here in the United States, and hopefully we'll get back there, where we're looking to add service. But this change in timing of travel, in travel patterns is pretty much universal, though. I think, and again, Jannet touched on this, the opportunity to work remotely. That tends to be an opportunity everywhere in the globe right now. And so it is allowing people to adapt their travel patterns in the way that we've seen. We're still seeing systems growing. In Paris, for example, there's a number of new metro lines that are being opened right now. In Dubai, we're looking to add capacity. I just mentioned capacity is a challenge, to add capacity to the system there. And in China too, where we're looking to add capacity. So, I would say, post-COVID, public transit is very much back on the growth agenda. The rates of growth are what's varying, I think, as you look across the globe.
And just a kind of real-time experience coming out of, certainly being on systems in Paris and London, just came back, Alex, on Sunday. So, real time. And we could not believe, as the transit agencies, the executives that were representing, the US and then the private sector, how much capacity constraints they have. To David's point, the London system, regardless, as we were getting on the trains and buses, regardless of what time of day it was, we were smushed against each other in terms of ridership. They very much are, at capacity and fully back in motion. So it is, an unbelievable pattern of adoption or return to transit that we're seeing worldwide. So it's very positive.
Do you mind if I just circle back a little bit on something
Sure.
else on the evolution of transit?
Of course.
I don't want to kind of disrupt your interview here, but a couple of other things that I thought it might be worth mentioning. We're talking very much, of course, about ridership and travel patterns today, and how the service is evolving. But as an industry, we're changing actually, from an employer perspective and an employee perspective. And again, harking back to COVID, we know that the workforce availability has been a challenge across many industries, and transit has suffered that or experienced that too. Essential workers during the COVID period, and people did amazing work to provide services during that time. But we faced some labor challenges since then. And really, as an industry, we're adapting our approach to attracting employees, to making the work more attractive, to adapt the work to meet contemporary expectations, to improve diversity, and the work experience for employees. And so that's actually a big emphasis for us at Keolis. But actually, I know, through conversations with other leaders in the industry, it's an imperative for all parts of the industry. And so, while we think about the passenger face of transit very much, actually transit as an organization is changing as well, and in terms of who's participating, in transit. So that's something else I think is worth reflecting on. And just one other point, if I may, something you mentioned earlier. I don't think we're completely through the post-COVID continuum yet. We're in another phase, I think, and we hear a lot about funding challenges going forward. And I think, various parts of our industry are working through those challenges right now, finding alternative funding sources for transit, obviously looking at fare box contribution and how to improve that. But I think, the underlying theme is that it's recognized transit is essential. It's an economic generator. It's important for equity reasons. And the prospect of a society without good transit systems is not something that I think any of us can really comprehend or countenance. And so finding ways to overcome those challenges to make transit more effective and efficient and attractive is absolutely vital. But that's kind of where we are as an industry right now, is I think getting through that thought process on how do we square this challenge with funding for such an essential service. So I just wanted to throw those couple of things in as well.
David, you're making me think about Alex, as it relates to those trends. David triggered another thought that he and I speak a lot about. Maybe two quick things. Now, David will probably want to weigh in on this once I say it, and you pull us back if we're jumping ahead.
Okay.
But trends it's part of that question going back as to what we comparatively see, and David certainly can speak in much greater detail to how Keolis is integrally involved. But the carbon reduction focus, like we have in the United States, particularly with the current administrations under the bipartisan infrastructure law, IIJA. Alex, you're familiar with the funding as it relates to infrastructure and equity and reducing the carbon footprint, reducing greenhouse gas emissions gets to the equity piece that David's talking about as well. So I wanted to highlight that and talk about how we are seeing that is something that other countries absolutely have mandates, if you will, around as well. They're quite a bit ahead of us as it relates to reaching those goals. I mean, and obviously there's the environment is a bit different, the political landscape as well as other factors. But we are seeing zero emission technology, zero emission bus, even locomotives, all that trains, all of that discussion is happening. And in Paris and in London, they are well on their way to meeting their, goals that are like near term. I mean, like 2030. I mean, they are very much close to having their fleet converted to net zero emission goals. So we are following, kind of paying close attention to that. Our struggles with, perhaps with just capacity and availability will be something that we have to take on as an industry. And I know you're familiar with that, but very enlightening to see what they are doing in other countries in getting to a conversion of their fleets. The other piece, David, is on BRT. We're seeing, obviously, in the United States, we see it, and the other countries as well. I'll use that sexy word again. BRT, back when it was first introduced, it's not a new technology, but the way that the technology is being adopted now by large, medium, or small agencies is very different than we saw, 3 years ago or 5 years ago. It is now a solution that, regardless of the size of the agency, they're looking at bus rapid transit to ease challenges with capacity, dealing with congestion issues, applied correctly with signal priority. It is a great solution regardless of the size of your agency. So BRT is even being looked at in place of doing some of the rail alternatives in some cities, like in New York with Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. So it has been interesting to see, and that's also a zero emission technology that's being looked at too. So it's not just CNG BRT, but if you're going to adopt it now, why not go electric? So BRT and focus along with kind of around carbon reduction efforts from a technology perspective or trends. David, wouldn't you agree that we see worldwide?
Totally. Yes, absolutely. And I'd also agree that, in Europe and elsewhere, that does seem to be greater advancement around zero emission, buses, particularly zero emission technology and the deployment of it. Here in the United States, sometimes you hear, some questioning over whether it really is the way to go, whether it really is the future. And there are some challenges here, as Jannet mentioned, with supply of vehicles, for example. I can say from a Keolis perspective that we operate very large fleets of battery electric buses very successfully in various parts of Europe. And so, they seem to be beyond that dilemma or questioning stage, if you like. There's a wholehearted commitment to it there on a larger scale deployment than we've seen here so far.
Yeah, and kind of shifting gears, but kind of staying on the same kind of pattern here, because I know that contracting is much bigger elsewhere outside of North America. Can you talk about some of the benefits, maybe some of the hidden benefits even of contracting that people aren't so familiar with, and how those benefits are being derived in other countries, and maybe how they could be derived here in the US?
Yeah, again, if I'll start on this, and Jannet, I know will have some points to add, but something I often say, I think if you're an agency and you have a vision for how you want your system to operate in the future, a set of objectives, goals, ambitions, if you like, for what you want to achieve. A great way of getting the very best brains in the industry to contribute to your plan and to the achievement of those objectives is to put it out to the market. Be really clear on what it is that you want to deliver, and then put it out through a competitive procurement process, so that you get, as I say, the very best operators in the industry to work to come up with a plan to deliver the objectives that you need. It's actually a very healthy process, I think, going through the contracting cycle, because it encourages rethinking on where you're going, what you've achieved so far, what you want to achieve in the future, and what challenges you want to face, whether that's around growing ridership, it's about transformation of the system, it could be around running more efficiently, it could be about adapting the service specification, better safety standards, any of those and other things too. And really by engaging with contractors who operate on a very large scale with all of the experiences and expertise and knowledge and access to systems and so on, getting those contractors to come up with the plans and selecting the best plan that fits your needs, I think is a real benefit of contracting. And then in the contract life cycle, the contract bringing that, if they're a contractor such as Keolis, bringing that global expertise, having access to a wider workforce to help deliver projects, to deal with issues, to find solutions, to deliver new opportunities is a great benefit. That availability to expertise, to case studies, is something that we make available to all of our clients here in North America and across the globe. So that and the alignment of objectives, I think, can create a really synergistic relationship that delivers value for every partner in that relationship.
Yeah, well said, David. And I think about how we're also starting to, and following the lead of other countries too, more and more we're seeing, particularly in the transit space. I think, sometimes it's hard to describe the contracting trends and compare apples to apples with, let's say, DOTs that are building roads and that sort of thing. Public transit is now doing more alternative delivery approaches to the way that we're delivering contracts and progressive design build and that sort of thing. We're seeing those changes, which are positive. It's all about how do we speed up that process. The other piece that I thought I'd mention is the FTA, and really compliment the FTA, recognize the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration and US DOT, for recent talks that they've had, convening discussions in DC at the White House around some of the, let's say, archaic contracting processes, procedures over the years, right? Particularly as we've come up smack into the challenge of supply chain issues. And this is all post-COVID, David, right? So that kind of really revealed itself. And there's been a look at assessing and understanding what is creating some of the constraints or capacity concerns, particularly for vehicles, as we're talking zero-emission buses, for example. How do we ensure that we've got enough OEMs that are in North America, that are in the United States? We've had a couple of challenges with folks that have left the market. And so we're down to just a couple at this point, as you know. And so what's caused that? And then how do we also ensure that we're not creating a situation where, where companies cannot deliver? So looking at how we're procuring those vehicles, looking at payments and milestone payments, looking at the timeline for, kind of just getting through the process, as well as, I would say, David, the customization requests that agencies over the years have just gotten more and more rigid with the level of customization for a vehicle. That is a difference that gets highlighted, David, when we were in Spain, that came up, as well as recent study missions. The way that the U.S. market procures vehicles, for example, paint colors, customization of the systems that are on board, that sort of thing, is very unique in comparison to our colleagues outside of the United States in terms of what they pick. I mean, it's been like us going to buy a new car. We go up to the dealership and we tell them, yeah, I want this type of radio. I want these type of speakers. I want these kind of tires. Oh, and my windows. I want this manufacturer for my windows. And then my seats. I want to pick my own seating company. It'd be outrageous. We'd never have a car. If we did, it'd be so expensive. But that's kind of what we do in the American market, right, David?
That's a great point. And, that obviously drives cost, it drives availability, it also drives performance as well, because, the integration of systems, if you've got bespoke systems or bespoke integration, then that really minimizes the opportunity to improve reliability and so on. So there's a vicious circle or a virtuous circle there, depending on which way you look at it, depending on which direction we go in.
Thanks for taking the time again, Jannet and David. I just had one last question is if you could just kind of give a brief outlook about what we could look at in North American transit. Where do you kind of see us going in kind of the short-term future?
David, I'll let you answer, please, David.
Please. Okay, thank you. So I think I mentioned it earlier, getting through the questions on funding, I think is really important. And I hope that we are seeing real progress there. So we have greater clarity on the future, the important future of public transit here. And then from a passenger and a service offering perspective, I think the continuation of making journeys seamless, of finding better ways of integrating journeys, solving that, first and last mile puzzle, which is such an important element to encouraging people to use public transit. I think, that's really so important for us. And so micromobility, and I know it's a word that we often use, but I think that is, increasingly important here. We're seeing some exciting developments in things such as robo-taxis, for example, autonomous vehicles, which we've talked about for probably eight plus years, but now I think we're getting to the point where we may see some larger scale deployment of those as part of the public transit infrastructure and to help solve that first last mile, dilemma that we have. And so I think there's a lot of exciting development still to come. I really feel like we are on a journey here, and that that we're picking up pace as we go. So I think the future is really exciting, and I look forward to transit having a greater role to play in the fabric of society as we go forward.
Again, well said. I also see, and I want to tie back to that changing pattern of riders and such. We're seeing with the opportunity to have special events. Dave, I want to talk a bit about that coming with the Olympics, the World Cup coming to North America, all of that in the next 2 to 4 years. We're seeing how we can ensure that transit is part of that excitement and that conversation. So throughout the country, it is how do we bring those riders in and then they stay? But you do that by ensuring they have the same type of technology and awareness of how to ride public transit for those games, for the Olympics. Lots of technologies being implemented, as always happens. When I was in Atlanta, we implemented a host of technologies just in time for the Olympics in Atlanta. So taking a look at that holistic strategically, we're seeing a trend towards understanding what those needs are and making sure, whether it's using any of the technologies that David just mentioned, that availability and that awareness and understanding that we're part of that conversation, ensuring that that those ridership needs are met, and hopefully those folks that are using it perhaps for the first time, they become lifelong public transit users. So that trend in targeting those type of events, taking advantage of what's coming, is what we see happening as well.
Great. Jannet, David, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. I can't wait for our listeners and our readers to hear this.